in their face. I think, you can handle it certain ways, but it's not up to women to make this better. Honestly, I think it is up to older white men to help the younger men through this, to help normalize the fact that culture is changing, because the quote unquote adversary can't do that. They're not going to listen.
As a older white man who was just addressed here, I was just thinking, okay, so what are the differences between when I was growing up and now? And one of the key differences, and this is just from my experience and my observations, but when I was young, and when I hear my father talk, it was pretty similar. So now we're starting to get pretty far back. Now you're getting back into the 40s and 50s when he was a young man. And your job was to figure out how to appeal to women, not to overwhelm them, not to guilt them, not to browbeat them, but how to appeal to them. And I think part of the issue is I wouldn't even make it generational. I would say this cohort that we're talking about that is having all these problems has grown up with the notion that they shouldn't have to appeal to women. Women should be flocking to them.
Yeah, it's the caveman mentality. Hit them over the head, take them back to cave.
Women that I've known anyway just don't respond very well to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've sat though, Eric, and I've talked to a couple of these people just after we did that show on Charlottesville. A couple of them talked to me a little bit, and also it's opportunity. They don't feel that they have any economic opportunities anymore.
Right.
Everything has been given just to put it out there. They blamed everything in my conversation with them. Everything from the NAACP to the women's movement to this to that has eroded any opportunity that they would ever have to get ahead. Like one of the gentlemen I talked to said, "Why do I have to be $90,000 in debt to graduate from college?" But the guy down the street that happens to be African American gets it for either free or heavily reduced. That's not fair. And so that's some of that angst that was that they threw at me. Go, well, wait a minute here. It's just not fair.
Exactly. And it hasn't. And that's the thing about being part of the white culture is that I think we're not used to things not being preferential toward us. Not fair. We've never cared about fair for other people. But the system should be skewed toward us.
Sure.
Right?
No, absolutely.
It hasn't been normalized. It hasn't been normalized because no other generation really has gone. This is one of the first generations that is going through some major growing pains in that arena where they're feeling like other cultures are being preferred, getting preferential treatment over them. And this isn't fair. Why should I even try? And part of me wants to say, hey, welcome to being a minority. Because as a woman, I am too. Yeah. Welcome to it, bud. This is how it feels. Yeah. Is it fair? No. But life isn't fair. It doesn't mean you stop. And I think that that's a big difference between men and women, why women are not suffering the same way, because women have always been second class, lower class. When you're a white male, you are watching your dad, just the generation before you, getting all these breaks, behaving really terribly at work and just getting a pass. Yeah. Doing all this stuff, getting a raise, whether he deserves it or not. But it's not happening for you.
Yeah, they want what their fathers had.
Exactly.
What I got a real feeling from when I was talking to these individuals is they would like it to go back to Ozzie and Harriet days.
Of course.
To where, you know what, the woman just stays home and does what she's told. And that didn't really work the greatest back then. That's why there is a woman's movement.
And that's why myth. It's a
she was
myth.
Never doing that anyway.
I was going to say.
The woman was never keeping her mouth shut. Look at cartoons from the 30s and the 40s. What is one of the absolute, archetype figures? That the domineering wife. Yeah. Right? So it's not as though, and that's another interesting thing to circle back around to Japan. Now, Japan, even now, to this day, though of course less so, like everywhere else, but is a very patriarchal society on paper.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is the woman rules the home. The woman is in charge at home.
Yeah.
And so the men are out there all puffed up, doing their manly things and going out with the guys, and they still go out and drink after work and make cat calls and are attended to by geishas and whatnot. Remember, we're in a transitional period worldwide, certainly including Japan. But there's certainly still an element of that going on. But when they're home, the woman is in charge, and really in charge. Interestingly, the way the woman rules at home is basically by shame. I will shame you, if you do not acquiesce to how I want to run this household. So, and I think there's a fair element of that. I know less about it, but from what I've observed and read and people I've talked to, there's a fair element of that in Arab culture too, where, again, very patriarchal according to law, according to, where all the rules about covering your face and your hair and your everything else and on and, until this year, no women driving in Saudi Arabia, and just on and on and on, all this nonsense. But in the home, it's a very different situation. I'm not sure if it's quite as extreme as it is in Japan, in Arab culture, but it's at least, a fair amount in that direction. So it's ironic that you have quietly underneath the surface, and everyone knows this is going on, it's unspoken, that, women have their place of where they're in charge. And that's not meant to be pejorative, a woman's place. That's meant, no, they're in charge there. You know what I mean? But in this day and age, and it's been quite a while, most families can't survive with only one breadwinner. Yeah. So the woman has to go, even in, Japan or the Arab world. Certainly here, it's been going on since, World War II, where the women have to go out and work. And now that's where you get into what's unfair and unfair labor practices and unfair promotions and unequal pay and the glass ceiling and everything else. So that's where things have to be made fair, is out in the public sphere and out in the work world. And so it's interesting how all of this works. And, if people, back to our incel friends, if they would not have a sense that it's my way or the highway, I am entitled, to my perception, because again, remember, it's not the real reality, it's their perception of reality. I'm entitled to my perception of the way it used to be, which of course it never really was. Then they may, they could work the way around this like every other generation has. You got to figure out what is it that appeals to women. And look, girls and women may be, have some different priorities now than they used to. Mm-hmm. So what's your job? Figure it out, man.
Well, you can never go wrong with respect and kindness, number one.
Yeah, no, you can't. And I like coming back to sort of how some of them can learn that. I really like that you pointed that out, Eric, that their idea of what it was like before is really informed by a lot of like pop culture things. And it wasn't really like that. And I think that, like my own father's kind of from a more stoic generation where he didn't talk much about the disappointments that he suffered at work, because you're the stoic, heroic man that comes home and eats dinner and takes care of the family. And I feel like that in particular needs to change, because it's not like white men decades ago didn't experience disappointments that they thought were due to affirmative action. It's not that men didn't come home and feel browbeaten by their wives. They did. But it's not reflected in popular culture. Not like everything is kind of out there today. It wasn't reflected back then.
Yeah. And that's just it. It's life. Yeah, I mean, it's just life. Get over it.
Oh, God. I mean, yeah, the battle of the sexes and the battle between different ethnic groups has been going on since the dawn of time. It's never been peaceful. The white man's on top and everybody gets along. That's never really been the case. But how would they know that if the previous generation isn't guiding them through it and saying, hey, yeah, you are paying more in loans than that guy, but you got to go to college and look at this other white kid down the street that didn't because his dad died. You know what I mean? It's always going to be a struggle. That's life.
That is life. Rule number 1 is life isn't fair. Rule number 2 is see rule number 1.
Yes, it is.
Well, the other issue here, since we're tackling this pretty large and certainly very serious topics, you also have to compare the macro to the micro, because there's all kinds, of difference there. In other words, affirmative action is there. That's a macro action. Mm-hmm. And it may be unfair to individuals, but we're trying to rectify a much greater societal wrong that occurred in the past.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the things that those who are inclined to building those kinds of corrective measures into society, those who would be, quote unquote, liberals, say, generally speaking, they need to do a much better job of explaining why, in the big picture, these actions are fair, because they're there to try to correct huge societal wrongs from the past.
That's when we need good leadership to do that, that they trust.
Yeah, and it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, you need it right at the top, tippity top. The people that they vote in the office that they trust, to tell them this, to explain this to them. To them, I don't mean to be like them, but no, really explain it to people who don't understand it or maybe weren't around to feel the impact of wrongs on other groups. They weren't there to really see the impact firsthand. I mean, it used to be really darn bad. I mean, it used to be really hard for these minority groups to get anything at all, period. And that wasn't that long ago. It was the 70s it was even bad then. So
think of it this way. You're right. And just to point that out. All right. Slavery in America ended. And this sounds like a long time, but it's not. It ended 150 years ago now, right? Mm-hmm. Approximately 150 years ago. What we are trying to do now is rectify built-in unfair disadvantages that former slaves and their families had that long ago. We still have not caught up. They still have not caught up. And all you have to do is look at statistics. All you have to do is look at the big picture. And that's why we have to address the big picture, even though it may be unfair to individuals on the micro level. And we have to figure out how to make that much more palatable. And we have to but we have to have society, all the elements of society have to buy into that.
Oh, yes, God, it has to be
time to make it fair.
It's every section of society. Slavery was 150 years ago. Women getting the right to vote was less than 100 years ago. And in, the Lutheran church that I grew up in, women got the right to vote in 1998.
Yeah.
So it's new.
It is very new. And hopefully society can change before we hit that tipping point like they did in Japan with this sarin gas attack from that cult. And I know it will. I have faith it will. We got to get out of here, guys. Take care of each other. Love each other. And remember, if we forget history, we are damned to repeat it. Thank you for listening to this edition of After Hours AM. And please remember to like us on Facebook and also follow us over on Twitter.